An intergalactic bombshell rocks the galactic community. The notorious Gorn Assassins Guild, known for their ruthless efficiency and willingness to take any contract, no matter how brutal, has banned all hits on humans. Rumors swirl about a shadowy event known only as the incident that prompted this unprecedented policy change. The Gorn pride themselves on their cold professionalism, so what could have shaken them so deeply that they now refuse to target humanity? Veteran investigative journalist Henry Simpson smells a story that could define his career. Determined to uncover the truth behind the incident, he seeks out an unlikely ally. Horus, a legendary Gorn assassin with a fearsome reputation and a strict code of honor. Unbeknownst to the galaxy at large, Henry and Horus share a secret past, having once worked together to expose a corrupt human corporation's illegal dealings in Gorn space. Now they must join forces once again to get to the bottom of this mystery. But the Gorn government wants to keep the details of the incident under wraps. Shadowy human factions have their own agendas, and even elements within the Assassins Guild itself seek to bury the truth. As Henry and Horus begin their investigation, they quickly realize that the stakes are far higher than they imagined. What they uncover could upend the delicate balance of power in the galaxy and change the future of human-Gorn relations forever. With danger lurking around every corner and few allies they can trust, Henry and Horus embark on a perilous quest for answers. From the glittering halls of power to the seediest depths of the galactic underworld, they will be tested at every turn. But they must persevere, for the fate of not just their species, but the entire galaxy, hangs in the balance. The incident holds the key to unlocking the truth, and Henry and Horus will stop at nothing to uncover its secrets. Henry and Horus stepped into the dimly lit bar on the lawless space station, their eyes scanning the room for their contact. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cheap liquor and stale smoke. Patrons of various species huddled around grimy tables, their conversations a low, indistinct murmur. In a shadowy booth at the back, they found Scoth waiting for them. The Gorn assassin regarded them warily as they approached, her reptilian eyes glinting in the low light. Horus slid into the seat across from her, while Henry hung back, letting the two assassins take the lead. "Scath," Horus said by way of greeting, his deep voice cutting through the background noise. "We need to talk." Scath hissed softly, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "You know I can't discuss guild business with outsiders, Horus, especially not a human." Horus leaned forward, his scarred face intense. "This is about more than guild business. It's about the future of our species. You refused a contract against a human diplomat. Why?" Scath's claws tapped against the tabletop as she considered her response. Finally, she spoke, her words carefully measured. "The incident changed everything. A team of human commandos sacrificed their lives to save a Gorn hatchery from Crux. He'd gone rogue, targeting innocent hatchlings. It went against everything the Guild stands for." Henry's eyes widened at this revelation. He'd heard rumors of the incident, but never anything this specific. His mind raced with the implications. Scath continued, her voice low and urgent. "The humans' bravery, their willingness to die for our young, it shook the Guild to its core. The Shadow Council voted to ban all contracts against humans until we could re-evaluate our view of them." Horus nodded slowly, his eyes distant as he processed this information. "Not everyone in the Guild agrees with this decision, do they?" Scath shook her head. "No. Many see it as a betrayal of our purpose. There are factions working against the new policy, trying to undermine it." Henry leaned in, his journalist instincts firing up. "We need to find out more about these commandos, get their side of the story." Horus shot him a warning look. "No, drawing attention to them could put them and their families at risk. We need to focus on the Shadow Council, find out who—" His words were cut off by the sudden sound of shouting and breaking glass. The bar erupted into chaos as a group of heavily armed thugs burst through the door, weapons drawn. Patrons screamed and dove for cover as the thugs opened fire, laser blasts scorching the walls. Henry ducked behind the booth, his heart pounding. Horus was already moving, his own weapon in hand as he returned fire. Scath leaped into action beside him, her claws flashing as she engaged the nearest thug in hand-to-hand combat. The fight was brutal and fast-paced. Henry did his best to stay out of the way, watching in awe as Horus and Scath tore through the thugs with ruthless efficiency. In a matter of minutes, it was over. The last thug fell to the floor, his weapon clattering from his lifeless hand. Henry slowly stood up, taking in the scene of carnage. Broken glass crunched under his feet as he made his way over to where Horus stood, breathing heavily. Scath was nowhere to be seen. "We need to go," Horus said grimly, holstering his weapon. "Whoever sent those thugs will be tracking us. We can't stay here." Henry nodded, his mind racing as they made their way out of the ruined bar. He had even more questions now than when they'd started. But one thing was clear. They were on to something big, something that someone was willing to kill to keep secret. As they stepped out into the seedy corridors of the space station, Henry knew that their next move would be critical. The Shadow Council held the answers they needed, but getting to them would be a dangerous game, one that could cost them everything. He glanced at Horus, seeing the same stubborn persistence in the Gorn's eyes. They were in this together now, for better or worse, and they wouldn't stop until they uncovered the truth behind the incident, no matter where it led them. The neon-lit underbelly of Atrox's capital city pulsed with life as Henry and Horus made their way through winding alleyways. Horus moved with practiced stealth, his scaled skin blending into the shadows. Henry followed close behind, his heart racing. "Remember," Horus whispered, "you're my slave. Keep your head down and your mouth shut." Henry nodded, adjusting the crude collar around his neck. The device chafed, but it was necessary for their ruse. They approached a nondescript building, its exterior weathered and unremarkable. Horus produced a small data chip, pressing it against a hidden scanner. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the air hung heavy with tension. Gorn of various ranks and subspecies filled the dimly lit chamber, their conversations a low, menacing hum. At the center, a raised dais held the most important members of the Shadow Council. Henry kept his eyes lowered, but his ears strained to catch every word. The debate raged, voices rising and falling as factions clashed. "The humans proved themselves at the incident," a gravelly voice argued. "We cannot ignore their potential as allies." Another voice, cold and sharp, cut through the air. "Allies? They are a cancer, spreading unchecked through the galaxy. We must excise them before it's too late." Henry risked a glance upward, his gaze settling on the speaker. The Gorn was lean and battle-scarred, his eyes glinting with malice. This, Henry realized, must be Zal. As the argument intensified, Henry's attention was drawn to a figure that seemed out of place. A human standing confidently among the Gorn council members. Henry's journalistic instincts kicked into overdrive, his mind racing to place the face. Elias Kane, arms dealer, rumored ties to human supremacist groups. What was he doing here? Suddenly, Zal's voice cut through the din. "We have traitors in our midst!" His claw jabbed towards Horus. "This one exposed Crux. He cannot be trusted." Chaos erupted. Zal's supporters surged forward, weapons drawn. Horus reacted with lightning speed, his own blade flashing in the low light. Henry, driven by instinct and loyalty, grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at the nearest attacker. The fight was brutal and swift. Henry and Horus fought back-to-back, fending off waves of assassins. Through the melee, Henry caught snippets of conversation between Zal and Kane. "The final solution," Zal hissed. "It must be ready soon." Kane's reply was lost in the din, but his cold smile sent chills down Henry's spine. With a burst of desperate strength, Horus carved a path to the exit. Henry followed, ducking laser fire and slashing claws. They burst out into the night air, alarms blaring behind them. "We need to get off-world," Horus growled, clutching a wound on his side. "Now!" Henry nodded, his mind turning from what they'd witnessed. "I know someone who might help, someone who's got reason to want Zayal taken down." Hours later, they huddled in the cargo hold of Scath's ship as it broke atmosphere. The female Gorn assassin had agreed to help, her own grudge against Zal outweighing her reservations. As the stars streaked by outside, Henry and Horus pieced together what they'd learned. The conspiracy, the biological weapon, the looming threat of interspecies war. "We can't let this happen," Henry said, his voice quiet but firm. We have to stop them. Horace nodded, his eyes glinting with tenacity. It won't be easy. We'll need allies, resources. And we'll need to overcome centuries of mistrust between our species, Henry added. The ship shuddered as it entered hyperspace. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the faint glimmer of hope. Henry and Horace exchanged a look, knowing that their real work was just beginning. The hyperspace journey ended abruptly as Scath's ship dropped into real space, the starfield stabilizing around them. Henry's stomach lurched at the sudden deceleration. We've arrived, Scath announced, her clawed hands dancing across the control panel. Outpost Zeta 9. It's not much, but it's off the grid. The outpost materialized before them, a hodgepodge of interconnected modules clinging to a barren asteroid. As they docked, Henry noticed a man waiting for them in the airlock. His stance was military rigid, but his eyes held a weary edge. Colonel James Harkin, the man introduced himself as they disembarked. Welcome to the Resistance. Harkin led them through winding corridors, explaining the situation in clipped tones. Kane's influence is spreading like a virus. He's got his tendrils in every level of government and industry. We're fighting a shadow war most people don't even know exists. They entered a command center buzzing with activity. Humans and aliens worked side by side, a stark contrast to the xenophobia gripping much of human space. On a central holo display, a familiar face sneered down at them. Elias Kane. Our latest intel suggests Kane is pushing for an all-out war, Harkin continued. He's stoking fears, manufacturing incidents, and he's not working alone. The display shifted, showing Zal's scarred visage. Henry felt Horace tense beside him. We've tracked increased activity at several Gorn research facilities, a new voice chimed in. A slender Gorn female stepped forward, her scales a muted green. I'm Shara. My analysis indicates they're developing some kind of pathogen. A weapon, Horace growled, designed to target humans. Harkin nodded grimly. We need proof, hard evidence to expose this conspiracy before it's too late. Henry's journalistic instincts kicked into overdrive. We need to infiltrate one of those facilities, get a sample, steal their data. It's suicide, Scath hissed. It's our only choice, Harkin countered. I've got a team ready. We move in 12 hours. The next half-day passed in a blur of preparation. Henry found himself strapping on body armor, his hands shaking slightly as he checked his weapon. Horace stood beside him, a steady presence. You don't have to do this, the Gorn assassin rumbled. Henry met his gaze. Yes, I do. The insertion went smoothly at first. Their stolen security codes got them past the outer defenses of the facility. Henry's heart pounded as they crept through sterile white corridors, the harsh chemical smell burning his nostrils. They reached the main lab without incident. Shara worked feverishly at a console, downloading files while Harkin's team secured a sample of the pathogen. Henry stood watch, every shadow making him jump. The quiet was shattered by an alarm klaxon. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in a hellish glow. We've been made, Harkin shouted. Move! They ran, laser fire sizzling past them. Henry's lungs burned as he sprinted, clutching the precious data module. They burst out onto a landing pad where their extraction ship waited. A familiar figure blocked their path, Zal, flanked by a squad of elite assassins. Traitors, the Gorn snarled, his eyes locked on Horace. What followed was chaos. Henry dove for cover as energy weapons lit up the night. Horace and Zal clashed in a blur of slashing claws and deadly precision. Go! Horace roared, grappling with his former commander. Get the sample out of here! Henry hesitated, torn between loyalty and duty. Harkin grabbed his arm, dragging him towards the ship. He's buying us time, the colonel shouted over the din. Don't waste it. As the ship's engines roared to life, Henry saw Horace fall, overwhelmed by Zal's forces. The last thing he saw before the hatch sealed was his friend being dragged away, still fighting. The ship rocketed into the night sky, leaving the facility behind. Henry slumped against the bulkhead, his mind blown. They had the evidence they needed, but at what cost? Harkin's voice cut through his thoughts. We've got a mole. Someone tipped them off. Henry looked around the cramped cargo hold, studying the faces of their ragtag group. Friend or foe, human or alien. In that moment, he realized how little those labels mattered. They were all in this together now, hurtling towards an uncertain future with the fate of two species hanging in the balance. As the stars streaked by outside, Henry clutched the data module to his chest. Somewhere out there, Horus was facing unimaginable horrors. And somewhere else, Cain and Zial were spinning their webs of lies and hatred. The real battle was just beginning. The ship's engines hummed as Henry stared out the viewport, his mind replaying the image of Horus being dragged away. Guilt gnawed at him, threatening to overwhelm his dedication. "We need to move," Harkin's voice cut through Henry's thoughts. "Outpost Zeta 9 is compromised. I know a place in the Necker system where we can regroup." Days later, they touched down on a remote human colony. The settlement was a hodgepodge of prefab structures and repurposed cargo containers, nestled in the shadow of towering alien flora. As they disembarked, Henry noticed the wary glances from colonists, their faces etched with the hardship of frontier life. Harkin led them to a makeshift command center. "We need to get this data to Central Allied Worlds leadership," he insisted, gesturing to the stolen bioweapon files. "It's our only chance to expose the conspiracy." Shara's scales rippled with agitation. "And risk it falling into the wrong hands? How do we know your leaders aren't in league with Cain?" The debate raged on, tensions rising as human and alien perspectives clashed. Henry found himself caught in the middle, torn between duty to his own species and the trust he'd built with his alien allies. A distant explosion rocked the colony, cutting short their argument. Alarms blared as panicked shouts filled the air. Henry rushed to the window, his blood running cold at the sight of shuttlecraft bearing Cain's insignia descending on the outskirts of the settlement. "They found us," Scath hissed, her claws flexing. What followed was a frantic counterattack. Henry found himself crouched behind a barricade, his heart pounding as energy weapons sizzled overhead. The colonists fought alongside them, their knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. In the chaos, Henry spotted a familiar face among Cain's forces, a high-ranking officer he'd interviewed months ago. The pieces clicked into place. "It's Admiral Briggs," he shouted to Harkin. "He's working with Cain." Their eyes met across the battlefield, and Henry saw the flash of recognition. In that moment, he knew there was no going back. The very institution they'd hoped would save them was compromised at the highest level. As the dust settled and Cain's forces retreated, Henry and the others gathered to assess their options. The human power structures they'd relied on were no longer trustworthy. They needed new allies, ones with the resources to stand against Cain's growing influence. "I have an idea," Shara said, her voice low, "but you're not going to like it." Hours later, their ship entered the orbit of a lush, violet-hued world, the Grand Homeworld. Henry's stomach churned as they were escorted to the palace of Lady Tamasra, matriarch of the renegade royal house. The Gran were known for their cunning and their centuries-old rivalry with the Gorn. As they stood before Tamasra's ornate throne, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a deal with the devil. "We'll shelter you," Tamasra purred, her three eyes glinting with barely concealed ambition, "in exchange for certain intelligence that might prove useful in the coming conflict." Henry exchanged glances with Harkin and Shara. They had little choice but to accept, even as the weight of compromise settled on their shoulders. Days passed in a haze of strategy sessions and uneasy alliances. Henry found himself longing for a neutral party, someone without a stake in the brewing interstellar war. That's when he remembered the Janix Collective, nomadic traders renowned for their impartiality. Through a series of covert communications, Henry made contact with Kareen, a Janix captain sympathetic to their cause. Her ship arrived under the cover of night, providing a means of escape from the increasingly suffocating hospitality of the Gran. As they prepared to board, Kareen pulled Henry aside. "There's something you need to know," she said, her multifaceted eyes somber. "Your friend Horus, he's being transferred to a secret Gorn prison outpost. They're going to try him for heresy against the Guild." Henry's blood ran cold. What happens if he's found guilty? Kareen's silence was answer enough. The Resistance now faced an impossible choice: risk everything to save Horus, or press on with their mission to expose the bioweapon conspiracy. Henry found himself drawn to Shara, seeing the same anguish reflected in her eyes. "We can't leave him," Henry said, his voice barely above a whisper. Shara nodded, her scales shifting with willpower. "No, we can't." As the others began to plan their desperate rescue mission, Henry stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Horus was facing unimaginable torment, and beyond that, the specter of interspecies war loomed ever closer. Yet even in the depths of this growing darkness, Henry clung to a fragile hope that the bonds they'd forged, human and alien alike, might yet be strong enough to weather the coming storm. The Janix ship hummed with tension as Henry and his allies finalized their rescue plan. Karine's multifaceted eyes glinted in the dim light of the command center as she relayed the intelligence on Horus's transfer. "The convoy will pass through the Cassiopeia Nebula in 6 hours," she said, manipulating a holographic star chart. "It's our best chance to intercept." Henry nodded, his fists tight. "We'll be ready." The next hours passed in a flurry of preparation. Harkin drilled the Resistance fighters on their roles, while Shara coordinated with the grand operatives Lady Tamazra had grudgingly provided. Henry found himself in the hangar bay, running pre-flight checks on a sleek starfighter. As the deadline approached, Karine's voice crackled over the intercom. "Convoy detected. All units, prepare for engagement." The Janix ship dropped out of hyperspace, and chaos erupted. Henry's fighters screamed out of the launch bay, joining a swarm of allied craft as they bore down on the Gorn prison transport and its escorts. Energy weapons lit up the void as the two forces clashed. Henry's hands flew across his controls, juking and weaving through the melee. A Gorn cruiser exploded to his left, peppering his shields with debris. "Transport shields are down," Shara's voice cut through the din. "Boarding team, move in." Henry watched as Shara's assault shuttle streaked towards the crippled prison barge. His stomach knotted with worry, but he forced himself to focus on the dogfight around him. Without warning, space rippled and a dozen cloaked ships materialized. Zal's assassins had sprung their trap. "It's an ambush," Harkin shouted. "All units, regroup." Henry's fighter spun wildly as he narrowly avoided a barrage of enemy fire. The Resistance forces found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. Just when it seemed they would be overwhelmed, a new fleet of ships dropped out of hyperspace. Karine's Janix allies had arrived. The battle devolved into a frenzied melee. Henry's comm crackled with desperate chatter as he tried to coordinate their forces. Through it all, one thought burned in his mind. Where was Horus? Aboard the prison barge, Shara and her team fought their way through waves of Gorn defenders. They found Horus in a holding cell, battered but alive. As they retreated towards their shuttle, Zaal's elite assassins struck. The narrow corridors became a killing ground. Shara watched in awe as Horus, despite his weakened state, moved with deadly grace against his former comrades. She fired her weapon with precision, covering his flank. A deafening explosion rocked the ship. Through a breach in the hull, Shara saw a battered starfighter hurtling towards them. Henry's voice rang out over the comms. "Brace for impact!" Metal screamed as the fighter tore through the barge's superstructure. When the dust settled, Henry emerged from the wreckage, bloodied but standing. His eyes locked with Zal's across the ruined corridor. "Get Horus out of here," Henry growled, not taking his eyes off the Gorn commander. "I'll handle this." Shara hesitated, torn between duty and loyalty. Horus placed a clawed hand on her shoulder. "He's right. We need to secure the data." As they retreated, Henry and Zal circled each other. The ship groaned around them, atmosphere venting through dozens of hull breaches. Their fight was visceral, a brutal exchange of blows that left both combatants reeling. A final explosion tore the barge apart. Henry felt the icy grip of vacuum as he was hurled into space. His vision dimmed, the stars blurring around him. Just before consciousness faded, he saw the blurred outline of a ship approaching. He awoke later in Karine's medical bay, his body racked with pain. Shara stood over him, her scales pale with worry. "The data," Henry croaked. "Did we get it?" Shara's expression darkened. "We did. But Henry, it's worse than we thought. As she explained the true nature of the nanovirus threat, Henry felt a chill that had nothing to do with his injuries. The galaxy teetered on the brink of unimaginable destruction. "We need to warn everyone," he said, struggling to sit up. "The Allied worlds, the Gorn, even the corporate oligarchs. No one's safe from this." Shara helped him to his feet. "Where do we start?" Henry's mind raced through their dwindling options. With a grimace, he made his decision. "We go to the heart of human space. It's time to make a deal with the Union corporate devils." Henry's grip tightened on the datapad as he reviewed the classified Astrodyne reports. The sterile conference room aboard Magnus Toron's orbital headquarters felt a universe away from the chaos of their recent battles. "This nanovirus, it's beyond anything we imagined," Henry said, his voice hoarse. Toron's face remained impassive, but his cybernetic eye whirred as it processed the data. "If what you're saying is true, Mr. Hawthorne, we're looking at an extinction-level event." Colonel Harkin leaned forward, his weathered face etched with concern. "That's why we came to you, Mr. Toron. Astrodyne has the resources to track this thing to its source." A tense silence filled the room. Henry could almost see the calculations running through the CEO's augmented mind. Finally, Toron spoke. "Very well, I'll deploy our best agents. But understand this, if we succeed, Astrodyne will have a significant say in how this technology is managed." Henry bristled at the implication, but Harkin placed a restraining hand on his arm. They needed Toron's help, regardless of his motives. Within hours, Astrodyne's vast intelligence network hummed with activity. Encrypted transmissions crisscrossed the galaxy, piecing together a trail that led to an unexpected destination. "The Azure Nebula?" Shara's scales rippled with surprise as she studied the star charts. "That's Jarul territory." Horus, still bearing the marks of his imprisonment, nodded gravely. "The Concordant has been locked in a covert war with the Marigi for cycles. This could be their endgame." As Astrodyne's Black Ops teams prepared for insertion, Henry found himself in a hushed conversation with Kareen. The Janix captain's multifaceted eyes glimmered with barely suppressed excitement. "My contacts can get us past the Jarul sensor nets," she whispered. "But it'll cost you." Henry grimaced. "Name your price." The mission that followed was a whirlwind of stealth, subterfuge, and desperation. Henry watched from the bridge of Kareen's cloaked vessel as Shara led a mixed team of human operatives and Gorn defectors into a heavily fortified Jarul command post. Encrypted chatter filled the comms as the infiltrators fought their way through alien defenses. Henry's heart raced with each burst of weapons fire, each agonizing moment of silence. Finally, Shara's voice crackled through. "We've got it. The Jarul are using something called xenogenite. It's the key to the whole nanovirus." Before Henry could process the implications, alarms blared. A massive Jarul fleet had emerged from hyperspace, converging on a nearby gas giant. "They're strip mining the planet," Kareen reported, her voice tight. "That must be where they're getting the xenogenite." What followed was a desperate scramble to assemble a strike force. Henry found himself making calls he never imagined, to Marigi war chiefs, grand matriarchs, even the shadowy underbelly of the galactic underworld. As the hastily assembled armada prepared to assault the Jarul stronghold, Henry caught Horus's eye. The Gorn assassin's face was a mask of steadfast perseverance. "Zal will be there," Horus said quietly. "This ends today, one way or another." The battle erupted in a maelstrom of energy weapons and explosions. Henry clung to his command chair as Kareen's ship dodged and weaved through the melee. On the main view screen, he watched Astrodyne's stealth ships streak towards the orbital facility, while Shara's commandos engaged the planetary defenses. A world of fire and metal filled Henry's vision as they closed in on their target. The fate of billions hung in the balance, with civilizations across the galaxy unknowingly relying on their success. As they prepared to board the Jarul research station, Henry's mind raced. The true nature of the nanovirus, the cosmic forces at play, the unlikely alliances forged in desperation, it all seemed too vast to comprehend. But as the airlock hissed open, revealing the alien corridors beyond, Henry pushed those thoughts aside. There was only the mission now, and the hope that they weren't already too late. The airlock hissed shut behind them as Henry and his team entered the alien corridors of the Jarul research station. The acrid smell of ozone filled the air, mingling with an underlying chemical tang that set Henry's nerves on edge. "Shara, take point," Henry whispered, gesturing down the dimly lit passageway. The Grand Warrior nodded, her scales shifting color to blend with the metallic walls as she moved forward with liquid grace. They hadn't made it far when Horus's comm device chirped softly. The Gorn assassin's eyes narrowed as he read the incoming message. "Henry," Horus said, his voice tight, "we have a problem." As Horus relayed the devastating news about the Jarul nanovirus to the team, Henry watched the color drain from Harkin's face. The colonel's weathered features hardened into a mask of steadfast perseverance. "Those bastards," Harkin growled. "This goes against everything the Guild stands for." Horus nodded solemnly. "My separatist brothers feel the same. They've pledged to join our cause. But," he trailed off, his reptilian eyes flickering with uncertainty. "But what?" Henry pressed. "There's still distrust," Horus admitted. "Some question the true motives of the human resistance." Before Henry could respond, Shara's voice crackled over the comm. "Contact ahead. Multiple hostiles." The corridor erupted into chaos. Energy bolts sizzled through the air as Jarul defenders poured from concealed alcoves. Henry dove for cover, the acrid smell of scorched metal filling his nostrils. "Push forward!" Harkin bellowed, his rifle spitting death at the alien aggressors. The strike force surged ahead, a patchwork alliance of humans, Gorn, Gran, and Morigi infiltrators fighting side by side. Yet even as they advanced, Henry sensed the underlying tension. Sideways glances and hesitant movements betrayed the fragile nature of their cooperation. They fought their way deeper into the facility, the air growing thick with smoke and the metallic tang of spilled blood, both alien and familiar. Henry's ears rang with the cacophony of battle, punctuated by the distinctive hum of Morigi energy weapons and the thunderous reports of Grand plasma casters. As they neared the central laboratory complex, a bone-chilling scream echoed through the corridors. Henry whirled to see Horus locked in vicious combat with a trio of Gorn assassins, his former brethren now sworn to Zal's cause. The fight was a blur of scales and flashing blades. Horus moved with fluid grace, but he was outnumbered. A lucky strike opened a gash across his abdomen, dark blood spattering the floor. Without hesitation, Henry charged into the fray. His makeshift alliance might be fragile, but he wouldn't abandon Horus. Together, they drove back the Gorn assassins, leaving a trail of broken bodies in their wake. "The nanovirus repository," Horus gasped, clutching his wound. "It's just ahead." They regrouped, pushing towards their objective with renewed urgency. The lab doors loomed before them, covered in alien warning glyphs. Shara's claws flew over the control panel, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. As the massive doors ground open, Henry's blood ran cold. The cavernous chamber beyond was filled with row upon row of sealed containment units, each pulsing with an eerie, sickly light. But it wasn't the sight of the virus that stopped him in his tracks. Standing at the center of the room, surrounded by heavily armed Gorn warriors, was Zayal himself. The Gorn commander's eyes glittered with malevolent triumph. "Welcome, Henry Hawthorne," Zayal's voice dripped with false warmth. "I've been expecting you." Before Henry could react, hidden panels in the wall slid open. Astrodyne security forces poured out, their weapons trained not on Zal, but on Henry's team. "What the hell?" Harkin snarled, his rifle swinging wildly between targets. A familiar figure stepped from behind Zal, Magnus Tauron, his cybernetic eye whirring as he surveyed the scene. "I'm afraid there's been a change of plans," Tauron said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your services are no longer required." Henry's mind raced, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The trap had been sprung, and they'd walked right into it. Henry's world exploded into chaos. Astrodyne forces swarmed around them, weapons trained on his team. Tauron's betrayal hit like a physical blow, leaving Henry reeling. "You bastard!" Harkin roared, raising his rifle. A deafening cacophony of energy weapons erupted. Henry dove for cover, dragging Shara with him, the air filled with acrid smoke and the screams of the wounded. "Fall back!" Henry shouted, desperately searching for an exit. A massive explosion rocked the facility. Alarms blared as containment units ruptured, spilling their deadly contents. Through the chaos, Henry glimpsed Horus locked in mortal combat with Zal, their forms blurring as they traded lightning-fast blows. "Henry!" Kareen's voice crackled over the comm. "We're taking heavy fire up here. You need to move." They fought their way out, every step a battle. Henry's lungs burned as they raced through corridors rapidly filling with a sickly mist. The nanovirus, freed from its prison. As they reached the docking bay, Henry turned back. Horus stood framed in the doorway, blood streaming from multiple wounds. "Go!" the Gorn assassin growled. "I'll hold them off!" Before Henry could protest, Horus slammed the airlock controls. The last thing Henry saw was his friend charging back into the inferno, blade flashing. The escape was a blur of explosions and near misses. It wasn't until they were safely aboard Kareen's ship, hurtling away from the dying station, that the full weight of what had happened sank in. "We failed," Shara whispered, her scales pale with shock. Henry shook his head, struggling to process. "No, it's worse than that. We were set up." Days passed in a haze of grief and mounting horror. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy, outposts going dark, ships disintegrating as the nanovirus spread like wildfire. And something else, something even more terrifying, entire star systems vanishing, consumed by an otherworldly darkness. They limped to a Janik sanctuary, gathering what remained of their shattered alliance. Grand mercenaries led by the enigmatic Lady Tamasra, Harkin's battered commandos, a handful of Kareen's smugglers. All that stood between civilization and oblivion. As they debated their next move, a priority transmission cut through the din. A gaunt-faced man appeared on the interface, his eyes burning with fanatical intensity. "I am Elias Kane," he declared. "In this time of crisis, I call upon all true humans to stand against the alien menace that has brought us to the brink of extinction." Henry's fists clenched as Kane's rhetoric washed over them, each word dripping with xenophobic poison. He turned to see Shara and Tamasra exchange worried glances. "We can't let this stand," Henry said, his voice hoarse but determined. "We need a plan." Tamasra stepped forward, her alien features set in grim purpose. "There may be a way," she said, "a weapon created by my people, hidden in the depths of the Azure Nebula." "The Azure Nebula?" Kareen interjected. "That's suicide. The entire sector's crawling with those things." Henry closed his eyes, weighing their dwindling options. When he opened them, he saw the same mix of fear and persistence reflected in the faces around him. "We don't have a choice," he said. "Shara, contact any Gorn sympathizers you can trust. Harkin, see if you can reach Admiral Gavriel. We'll need all the firepower we can get." As the others scrambled to prepare, Henry found himself staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Kane's forces were gathering. The nanovirus continued its relentless spread. And beyond it all, an incomprehensible cosmic horror devoured everything in its path. The future of the cosmos now rested on their shoulders. Henry took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battles to come. The Azure Nebula loomed before them, a swirling maelstrom of blue-green gases and cosmic dust. Henry stood on the bridge of their cobbled-together flagship, watching as the remnants of their fleet emerged from hyperspace. "Multiple contacts," Kareen called out, her fingers flying over the sensor controls. "Vidrax signatures everywhere. They're consuming entire systems." Henry's fists tight as he watched the horrific spectacle unfold on the main view screen. Entire stars vanished, swallowed by an incomprehensible darkness that defied the laws of physics. "We need to push through," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "Lady Tamasra, how close are we to New Keter?" The Grand Mercenary leader consulted her star charts. "The planet lies at the heart of the nebula, but Henry, the Vidrak entropic vanguard, stands between us and our goal." Before Henry could respond, a priority transmission cut through the din of the bridge. Admiral Gavriel's weathered face appeared on the screen, his eyes burning with stubborn persistence. "Hawthorne," the Admiral growled, "looks like you could use some firepower." A cheer went up as Gavriel's Republican fleet loyalists decloaked around them. Harkin clapped Henry on the shoulder, a rare smile crossing his face. "Let's give these cosmic horrors a taste of humanity," the colonel said. The void erupted in fury as their allied armada engaged the Vidrak. Energy weapons lanced through the nebulous gases, igniting brilliant explosions. Henry watched in awe as grand plasma casters tore through the entropic monstrosities, while Marigi stealth ships danced between the behemoths, striking with surgical precision. But for every Vidrak they destroyed, two more seemed to materialize from the darkness. And then, emerging from the far side of the nebula, came an even greater threat. "Kane," Henry breathed, recognizing the distinctive silhouettes of the Kratos warfleet. The battle devolved into utter chaos. Ships from all sides traded crippling blows, their hulls torn open to the void. Henry clung to his command chair as their vessel shuddered under the impact of a Kratos bombardment. "We're not going to make it," Shara shouted over the din of failing systems and screaming metal. Henry watched in horror as the Vidrak began to close their interdimensional maw around the embattled task force. It seemed all hope was lost when Admiral Gavriel's voice crackled over the comms once more. "Get to New Keter," the old warrior commanded. "We'll hold them off." Before Henry could protest, Gavriel's flagship surged forward, ramming itself into the heart of the Vidrak swarm. The resulting explosion tore a hole in the fabric of space-time itself, creating a narrow hyperspace corridor. "Go!" Gavriel's final transmission cut out in a burst of static. Their battered ship limped through the corridor, emerging in high orbit around New Keter. The planet's surface was a nightmare landscape of shattered continents and boiling seas. "I'm reading massive radiation storms," Kareen reported. "We can't stay here long." Henry nodded grimly. "Prepare the shuttles. We're going in." As they plummeted through New Keter's turbulent atmosphere, Henry's mind raced. The mythical Black Forge lay somewhere in the ruins below, their last hope against the cosmic horrors threatening to unmake existence itself. The shuttles crashed amid the twisted wreckage of an ancient granarchology. Henry stumbled from the smoking ruins, his ears ringing from the impact. Around him, the survivors of their audacious attempt gathered, a pitiful handful compared to the forces they'd started with. "Move!" Shara's voice cut through the haze. "Vidrak entropy wraiths incoming!" Henry raised his weapon as the first wave of horrors descended upon them. The air itself seemed to warp and twist around the creatures, reality fraying at their very touch. They fought their way deeper into the ruined city, every step a battle against both the Vidrak and Kane's Kratos shock troops. Henry's world narrowed to a tunnel of gunfire, explosions, and the screams of the dying. At last, they reached the central armory, a vast underground complex that seemed to stretch for miles beneath New Kedor's fractured surface. And there, at its heart, lay their prize, the Grand's ancestral, xenomic deconstructor. Henry approached the massive device with a mix of awe and trepidation. Its control matrices pulsed with an otherworldly energy that made his skin crawl. "We need to activate it," Lady Tamasra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the only way to stop both the Vidrak and the nanovirus." Before Henry could respond, the far wall of the chamber exploded inward. Through the breach stomped a nightmarish figure, half man, half machine, dripping with weapons. "Malkator!" Harkin spat the name like a curse. The cyborg general's eyes glowed with malevolent purpose as he surveyed the room. Behind him poured a seemingly endless stream of Kratos elite guards. "Henry Hawthorne," Malkator's voice was a mechanical growl, "your pathetic resistance ends here." The chamber erupted into a maelstrom of weapons fire and screams. Henry dove for cover, desperately trying to reach the deconstructor's controls. He watched in horror as Malkator tore through their defenses with terrifying ease. Suddenly, Shara was at his side. "I have an idea," she shouted over the din of battle, "but it's risky." Before Henry could stop her, Shara leapt towards the deconstructor. Her hands flew over the alien controls, overloading its exotic energies. The air itself seemed to ripple and distort, as the device's power built to a crescendo. A blinding flash filled the chamber. When Henry's vision cleared, he saw Malkator sprawled on the ground, momentarily stunned by the implosion blast. But their reprieve was short-lived. Through the haze of battle, Henry watched in growing dread as Kane's reserve troops unleashed a payload of shimmering nanites. The nanovirus swarm collided with the deconstructor's quantum matrices, replicating at an exponential rate. Reality itself began to unravel around them, as the hyper-destructive swarm manifested on multiversal translocation pathways. Henry's mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the cosmic horror unfolding before his eyes. In that moment of utter chaos, a terrible clarity descended upon him. There was only one option left, one final, high-stakes endeavor that might save existence itself, even as it spelled their doom. Henry turned to Shara, his heart heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. "Get everyone out of here," he said quietly. "I'll handle the rest." Shara's eyes widened in understanding. "Henry, no!" But he was already moving, racing towards the deconstructor's central core. Behind him, he could hear Malkator roaring back to life, feel the thunderous footsteps of the cyborg general closing in. Henry's fingers flew over the alien controls, coding the final overload sequence. The device hummed with building power, reality fracturing around its pulsing core. As the survivors retreated and Malkator's massive form loomed over him, Henry allowed himself one final moment of reflection. He thought of all they had lost, all they had sacrificed to reach this point, and he thought of the universe that might be, a cosmos reborn from the ashes of their struggle. With a silent prayer to whatever forces might be listening, Henry Hawthorne activated the Xenomic Deconstructor.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.